Anybody hear me? Morning. If you have a Bible, turn to John chapter 5. And again, if you're still making your way in, my name is Jason, senior pastor here with my wife, Bev. It's lovely to see you this morning. And if you don't have a Bible, by the way, we have some Bibles on our welcome area. We want everyone to be able to have access to a Bible. We've got some lovely Bibles there. So if you don't have one, or you ever bring a friend along with you who doesn't have a Bible, please do take one of those as a gift from us. But we are at the end of our series on the chapter of John. We're never going to finish the whole of the book of John. We're going through to chapter 5 today. We've got the Denzel and Leanne with us next week, and some stuff on missions. It's going to be very exciting interviewing them, and I'll be here looking forward to that. And then baptisms, and then we start with a new series after Easter. So Faith is down to read. Faith, thank you. So John chapter 5, verses 1 to 18.
The healing at the pool. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. And when Jesus saw him lying there and learnt that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well. Amen.
And verses 16 to 18. So because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. In his defense, Jesus said to them, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working." For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Thank you, Jason and Faith, for the reading this morning. And so... this passage here is this. We're focusing this morning on rest and Sabbath and healing. That's what we're going to pull out from this. There's lots of background to this passage. It was a pool that was known for a place for healing, a bit like Lourdes, and the idea was that when the water stirred, and there was an idea that angels would sometimes turn up, and if you got there in time, when you were the first person in, you would find healing. So whether that was just the wind blew on it, but it's kind of vicious circle for people who were there who couldn't get into the water and then sat there, in this case, for decades. Is anyone here tired? Anyone here this morning tired? Could I have a show of hands for anyone who is tired? My goodness. Look at that. Is there anyone here who was not tired? We hate you. Despise you. What's wrong with you? You obviously haven't got proper lives. So, if a friend said to you that they were just, if you asked them all the time, how you go, so how are you? How's your week? Oh, just amazing. Got such rest. I'm at rest and peace. And they were like that all the time. What would you think? I hate you. Hebrews chapter 4, verses 9 to 10. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their work or labor just as God did from his. There's a truth as Scripture tells us we're supposed to Sabbath. Sabbath is very important in this passage. We're going to pull that out. We can often think it's about the healing, but it's about healing and Sabbath. So beyond spas and holidays and mindfulness, there is a rest for God's people deep in their souls and identity. And when we put our hands up, it's quite a diagnostic, isn't it? And living in London at this time in history, I thought it ironic I was just scheduled to do this talk today. If there was a passage I could have avoided, it would have been this one. Okay, in my annual review with the trustees, my performance reviews, I've yet to speak to them. There's one comment from one of the trustees whose initials are Tom and Miles, I think, said that Jason will be in this year striving to work less. I think that was slightly ironic, wasn't it? How can you strive to work less? I struggle with this passage and Sabbath, and I'm often not at rest. And at least I'm in good company, because I think about 3/4 of the room all said that you were just as tired, yeah? So what has Jesus got for us in this passage at this time when we're not finding rest? Anybody like me like to find this Sabbath rest that God has? Would anybody like to walk out the door? I know as I was preparing for this, I went, Lord, please help me find this rest. I really need it. And I'd like it to be on my annual review in time for Tom to see next year. The problem. We need to get a little bit theological for a minute, if we can do that. When we get to the questions of the Sabbath and Pharisees and the law, and we can think it's just some weird Jewish thing that doesn't apply to us. If you've been Christians for a while, you'll have heard about the law. And again, but day to day, you're not going through your week and going, oh, I keep bumping into the law and the rules for the Sabbath. That's not how most of us go through life. We can think it's just a strange Jewish thing. But it's not. It's the human condition that affects all of us. And it is underneath not just why the Jewish people could not find rest and enter into God's rest, but why we cannot enter into God's rest. Now, most of the law is described, is verbalized, whether it's the law is the entirety of the Old Testament, it's the entirety of the Ten Commandments, and all these other things that go through the Old Testament and become the laws. And these laws are descriptions of the fabric of the universe in terms of how God meant things to be. And they're supposed to show us two things. They're supposed to show us how life could be before God and why things are not the way they could be before God. That makes sense? That's what the law means. So let me give you some examples. The Sabbath. God intended in his creation from the beginning that once we had worked hard and co-labored with him, there would be a regular space in our week where we will be at rest, not in the work that we've done, but in him. That he sustains us to let go, to be at peace and to rest in our Creator. That was what he intended us to do on a weekly basis. And then from Adam and Eve onwards, it all goes wrong. And we have this 24/7 lifestyle where we can't enter into God's rest and are further from it than ever. And in a way, nothing's changed, we'll get to that in a moment, between how we are as legalistic as the Jewish people were. So in this story, it sounds kind of strange, doesn't it? This guy, he's carrying his mat around, like his yoga mat or something. And he gets into trouble instantly. That's work! It's like, that's ridiculous. How can that be work? Well, again, this is what we all do as human beings. The devil is in the detail. So God says, it's really good for you. You need to enter into my rest. One of the problems is, does this sound familiar? Anyone put their hand up for being tired? One of the reasons we don't rest is because we're prone to just carry on working. So then we go, well, Jesus, what's work? In other words, what can I get away with? Then in this Jewish context, they did what we would do. They go, I'll just do a bit of this. I'll just do a bit of that. And so in terms of trying to recover something, the wonderful notion of being at rest in God and not working, turn it into something legalistic and get down to this level of detail where if this guy had picked his mat up and worn it as a cape or put it round his waist, that would be fine. It would be an unusual fashion accessory. And he would just be in his clothes. But because he had it under his arm and was carrying it, it was work. Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? How absurd. We would never do anything that stupid, would we? You couldn't travel on the Sabbath as well. Because the idea, if you were traveling, it was tiring. And you should be with your family. You should be worshipping with God's people. not travelling somewhere, not going anywhere. So do you know how they got around this one? Well, they got down to a definition of what travel from home meant, and apparently it was 1,000 yards. So what people would do is they also had another rule where if you had food, because things were pretty basic back then, as long as you stored your food somewhere else, it was an extension of your home. So what people would do is they would put food in places that they wanted to go to get around this travel. I'm not travelling, I'm just going to my holiday home down the road. And again, we wouldn't do anything so stupid, would we? How many of us spend every Sabbath travelling somewhere? It's amazing what we can disguise as travel. So something that goes from an idea, be at rest in God, stop trying to escape and be somewhere else, and we turn it into rules. Another one, promises. Scripture says really keep it. Jesus says later, let your yes be yes, not a maybe. Is your yes really a yes? Where does that come from? A whole tradition that before God, that when you commit to something and say something, your yes means yes, and your promises and your oaths. So how did they get around that by this time in this story? Well, some clever, smart guys, Pharisees and the Jewish people figured out, wow, there's a bit of it. They go, well, what is an oath really? What counts? And they go, well, if you swear by heaven, that's an oath. If you swear by the earth, that doesn't count. So a lot of people go, I swear. It's like putting your hand behind your back and crossing your fingers to try and cancel it out. Isn't that bizarre? Here's one of the weirdest ones of all. Apparently putting vinegar on your teeth was a painkiller. I mean, I went to the dentist the other day. It's always painful when you go to the dentist, isn't it? And then you're like, they're going to do all stuff to you, make your teeth hurt. But I can't imagine not having a dentist and all the wonderful things that we've got access to. So vinegar was it. So apparently putting vinegar, I don't know how they got there, but this is what happens. Putting vinegar on your finger and rubbing it on your teeth was work. You could get in trouble for that on the Sabbath. But put some vinegar on your fish and chips and eat those, that was fine. Do you see how absurd it is? Rules, the law. So taking something that's supposed to be life-giving, and then we want to know, what can I get away with? What doesn't count? Where can I bend the rules on this? Where is this okay? This is what the Jewish people were doing. And this is our problem too. We take God's design for us and we try to see what we can get away with. We take God's design for us and try to see what we get away with. Now, I became a Christian when I was 17. And I had this wonderful thing taking place in my body at 17. They were called hormones. Anybody remember hormones when you were younger? I remember mine. Raging hormones. And then I become a Christian and then hear about all these wonderful things and purposes God has for my body in creation. With one day my hopeful partner, now my spouse. I remember sitting through youth group meetings where basically the questions were always this: what can we get away with? Both feet on the floor? Or, you see, legalism's never changed. What can I get away with? Imagine if we really observed the Sabbath, really observed it. Think about your year. Is anyone like me going, how did we get to April? Now imagine if your year was punctuated by 52 experiences of Sabbath, and compare that to last year. If one day a week you really didn't work, didn't pretend to work, sneak any work in, and you weren't doing household chores. If one day a week all you did was to worship your God and sit before him and be present with your church family and friends and opened up your life and sat back and explored who God is and what he's done for you. 52 of those a year. How would that compare to last year? Probably very different, wouldn't it? Archbishop William Temple said this: your religion is what you do with your solitude. Many of us have heard paraphrases that. Who we really are is what we do when no one's looking. When we think no one's looking. And the reality is God is always looking. And that's one of the reasons we do these rules and regulations, because that's about other people and what we can get away with in front of other people. I like Eugene Peterson, you know, the guy that was responsible for the Message translation of the Bible and wrote lots of Christian books and died very recently. He talked about bastard kingdoms. He also talked about bastard Sabbaths. Eugene Peterson did not mince his words and called a spade a spade. And he said one of the reasons Christians don't rest is because they have bastard Sabbaths. They do anything and everything other than rest in God. Whether it's fun runs, hobbies, holidays, some sneaky emails to get ahead at work. I'll just do this. And Eugene Peterson let's call them what they are, bastard Sabbaths. They're not resting in God. They're our own creation. And we wonder why enough of them do not make us better. So what do we really rest in? What does our heart and soul and mind go to? That's the Bishop, Archbishop Temple. Your religion is what you do with your solitude. When you're really, really tired, and there were a lot of people that went like this. And if you're looking forward to something, what is it? Oh, the weekend. Friday. A holiday. Something. Or is it God himself? Because what's at stake here is God is our rest. I had a strange experience the other morning, bare my soul. I woke up in the middle of the night, about 3 a.m., and I was quite awake, and I went, "Hello, Lord. How are you?" And I thought, that's the first time I'm waking up that I can remember my thoughts being turned towards God. In like so long I can't even remember. And it horrified me that most of my thoughts, when I wake up, are usually what I've got to do. What are your thoughts when you wake up? Are they, "Hello God, thank you that you love me and sustain me"? Or, "Oh, bum, you did a thing. What day is it? Monday, Tuesday. Oh, okay, do this." That's what my day boots up into. To go from my work. And if I get that out of the way, then I can rest. And we come up with some strange things and habits and restrictions. You know the Meatloaf song, "I'll do anything for love, but I won't do that." You know that song? We sing songs up here. We'll probably have some later. Jesus, I'll go anywhere. I'll do anything. As long as it's when I want and how I want and I've got everything I need to do it. That's often what we default to. Oh, too tired, too busy, can't do it. And we make our own little rules and our own laws, our own Pharisaical religion, because it's what it is. And we've got to dig into this before we're ever going to find any peace and rest. We make laws around our insecurities, our fears, our worries, our circumstances, our past, our parents, our families. So let me tell you one I've come across many as a pastor. I remember someone in our church many, many years ago who just would always be late for everything. Turn up late for small group, turn up for leaders' meetings. And his wife was getting really, really cross. It's like, we're missing out on time when we could be in small group and family. And it was even family events. And eventually got to the bottom of what was going on with this guy. Because of some experiences when he was younger with his family, he'd made some rules for himself that he had to be a good, if anything else, he was going to be a good father. And he was going to be at home. And he would always sit down with his family and have a meal. So no matter how late he came back from work, instead of grabbing a sandwich on the way to small group with his wife, he would insist that they sat down and have a meal. And she's like, "We've missed small group again." And what was going on underneath was, on the surface, what sounds good, doesn't it? I want to get home every day to have a meal with my family. Was actually an outworking underneath of something very unhealthy. Of, I've got to force my family to sit down at the table with me. Do you see how something that sounds good on the surface was turning into something very unhealthy for his family? And his wife says, "You're a good dad, even when you get back late. You're a good dad if we have to rush out the door. You're not a good dad because we sit down every night and have a meal together that no one wants to have all the time." These are the things that we do. If that illustration's uncomfortable, it should be. We all have no-go zones. We all have places. No, can't go there, can't do that. And the reason we construct them is because we're not really at rest. Now, let's get back to the story, last two parts. The Bible calls that place and space where we bastardize things and come up with our own ways of dealing with life and finding place where we really go to for our rest, and it's not God, calls all those things idolatry. All idolatry. Putting the best thing, even the best things in life, and making them the thing that we find our rest in. Well, this man in this story was facing his own idolatry, so let's unpack that from the story as we work backwards. Do you notice in the story, this man doesn't approach Jesus? He doesn't come, Jesus, Son of God, heal me. Jesus turns up. Jesus goes to this pool. Jesus goes and finds this man. He has no idea who Jesus is in this story. And Jesus gets there and he asks him what we might think is an obvious question. Do you want to get well? Do you want to be well? Well, Jesus would have known about this pool. So do we believe Jesus, the Son of God, knew when he said something why he was saying it? It's a good place for us to start that he did. And in fact, Jesus doesn't say, do you want your body to be healed? Jesus asks a very different question in the original language. Do you want to be well? Now, most of us would think, well, surely, it's obvious. This guy needs healing. He's been here 38 years, wasn't it, in the story? If I got physically healed, then my life would be transformed. Jesus knew another reality. He knew two things. We'll have to read a little into the text here, but it's warranted, and some commentators would say the same. The first one is some of us think if our circumstances changed, then we would be different. And the reality is our circumstances often change, and it makes no difference to what's really going on in us. That's why there's this horrendous statistic that I read again the other day. 76% of people who win the lottery end up bankrupted. You'd think, how is that possible? If I had that much money, I'd have no problems. No. It's the ultimate picture of you can have all the financial resources in the world and it still does not attend to what is really wrong in your life. It was never the money. Never the money. So this man is here. You're going to have to bear with me. Jesus is pretty blunt with this guy. Do you want to get well? Not do you want physically to be healed? And what does the guy do? He doesn't fall down. Messiah, Son of God, please heal me. He has a moan at Jesus. Wow. Let me tell you about my life. Been coming here every day. Can't get in here. He has a moan at Jesus. And Jesus tells him to pick up his mat and walk. And then this strange thing unpacks here. And it's quite likely this man didn't want to be well at all. Because his whole identity had become not being well. I find this pastorally with people. Some people, when there's a difference between having been hurt in the past and when someone talks about my abuse, and they use the word my in an almost Gollum-esque way. My, it's who I am. I wouldn't know who I was if I didn't have this pain. And that's why some of us, when we don't really want to be well, we just want our circumstances to be different. Because to be well would be a change of identity. It would mean to live differently. Jesus warns us. Do you remember the story when Jesus says about binding up the strong man? He says, if you come in and I bind up what the enemy is doing in your life, the problem is the enemy can just move straight back in with a whole load of other things in your life. Jesus wants to go deeper than the physical, and he does with this guy. So this guy stands up, picks up his mat, doesn't say thank you to Jesus, does he? Off he goes. We don't know if picking up his mat was an act of defiance, but the rest of the story may mean it was an act of defiance. It wasn't an act of joy. And he's immediately challenged. And he goes, oh, don't blame me. Don't blame me, blame him. If I'm doing something wrong, it's because he just changed my circumstances. He blames Jesus. See, we can be scared of being well because we might have to live differently. And we often go through life, when I'm a bit older, when I get through this, has anyone ever said this? Oh, it's just a season. And that one's turned into several years. Some people get to the end of their life and they realize their whole life has been waiting for a season that would never, ever happen. Or we say things like, well, when I've got a job, and then we get a job. Or this one, when I own a house, then I'll be able to just do those, like that house group thing that people do, and open it up to other people. And then suddenly you find, I'm so knackered working hard for this house that I've got. Oh, maybe next year I'll open it up. Maybe when I've had kids. Maybe when the kids have left. Maybe. See, God can bring into our lives the very thing that we think we need, and it can still make no difference. So this man hasn't declared that Jesus is Lord. He still laments his situation. Don't blame me, blame him. And in the story, Jesus goes and finds this man again. Do you find that interesting? Jesus goes to pursue him, give him a follow-up. He's healed him. And then he goes and follows him up. And what does he say when he meets him? Just making sure you're all right? Everything okay with the Pharisees? Just checking in? All good? Scale of 1 to 10? How's the pain? No. What does Jesus do? Jesus said to him, you're not well yet. You're not well at all. Still haven't dealt with what's really at the bottom. You go, well, who is Jesus? Who does he think he is? This poor man in this situation. Sometimes we're like that with God, aren't we? God, who are you to tell me about my situation? If you've been through what I've been through. If you've been through it. And Jesus finds this man again, and he has to speak to his real problem beyond his body and his circumstances. And he says, if you really want to be well, if you really want to be at rest, we've got to deal with your real problem, and it's called sin. S-I-N. Sin. Stop living for yourself and start living for me. And what does the guy do in this story as a result of this interaction with Jesus? What does he do next? Does he go back to the Pharisees and say, right, I've got a bone to pick with you. That's the Messiah. He's amazing. What does this guy do? He goes and rats on Jesus again. And says, in other words, who does this man think he is who made me walk to come and tell me? It's him again. He's the problem. This is not an amazing story. We are supposed to be shocked by this story and think, if I was physically healed like that, I'd say, Jesus, I'll go anywhere. I'll do anything. Have you ever seen that in this story? This is not a grateful man who opens his life up to following Jesus. This is a man who resents the healing that he's had because now he's going to have to work. And we all do this with laws and systems to really stop us dealing with sin and idolatry. So lastly, how often do you and I, when we're tired, let me ask the question this way. When I said to you how many of you were tired, you've got reasons for being tired, haven't you? Anyone got too much work going on? Too much financial pressure? Too many relational things? Too much relationship in your life, too little relationship, whatever it is. There's things that we are struggling with. How often, when we take those to God, is our first thought, oh God, forgive me show me the idolatry that's at work in my life about my job, my marriage, my relationships. Is that the first place we go to? I suspect if you're like me, it's the last place you go to. God, please, fix my wife. If she moans one more time, I'll show her. We get passive aggressive, whatever else we do. Anyway, I'm just disclosing on my marriage. But anyway. Because my wife's brilliant, it's all my fault. But is any of this connecting? You see, our prayer life, our interactions with God, like this story. In this story, Jesus Christ himself says, do you want to be well? And he has this one-to-one interaction. Because of Christ's death and resurrection, he is available for us to have one-to-one interactions wherever we are. And he wants to say to us, do you want to be well? Do you want to be well? Well, really, I'd just like you to change my circumstances. And then could I get on with my life? And Jesus said, that's more of the problem. Whatever you are struggling with right now, under that tiredness, the first place to go is, God, where is it? Because I've got my hope in the wrong thing, because I'm worshipping the wrong thing, because the thing I think that will give me rest is anything apart from you. How often do we do that? Let me give some painful examples. Parents whose children go off the rails. I mean, completely off the rails. Got one friend at the minute whose kid's gone to prison. You don't get more heartbreaking than that, do you? If you're a parent, the aspirations for your children. And what he's wrestling with is he had all these aspirations for his children. And his children were his glory. But God's supposed to be his glory, not his children. Not his children. People that lose their jobs. Many of you have lost jobs. And when we lose a job, it is painful and unsettling. But I've seen some people over the years whose faith literally unravels. They say that they believe that Jesus is going to raise them from the dead, but when they've lost their job, it's as though God does not exist. You see how those two are incompatible with one another? They don't go together. Because what's happened is we've made our job our identity and not Jesus. And some of us have been through this or seen friends go through this. When our parents die, our parents will not live forever. And sometimes some of us end up in a place where you think God didn't exist again because our parents have died. Because what happens is when a parent dies, all those unresolved, our overdependence upon them, the pain from the past with them is never dealt with and hasn't been. And there is no rest there. And we unravel. And as a pastor, talking to pastors whose churches don't grow in the way that they'd hoped, or things fail, their lives disintegrate, when they're supposed to be about Jesus. Is any of this hitting home? I think it is. By some of the weight. You feel the weight of that? The weight of all those places and those things is what Jesus comes to set us free from. Because those are the things that stop us entering his rest. Do you know how many parables there are in the Bible? If I had some chocolate, I could throw it to someone if they gave me the right answer. Do you know how many parables of Jesus there are? There's 46. 46 of them. Most of the parables of Jesus unpack this issue. They unpack the problem of being deeply religious but having anything other than God as the basis for our life and how dangerous it is. A few in particular, Jesus tells us a story about a rich man who stores everything up in a barn. And you remember what happens in that story? It's for today's terms, it'd be like having a big pension. I've got so much money I can retire early and then I can rest. And what happens to the guy in the story? He dies! And the parable is, you can have the biggest pension in the world, but it's meaningless if you die before you can draw down on it. I've got a close family member who's got another family member through marriage, who, a very sad story, and it is sad. Incredibly wealthy, had massive pensions, took early retirement, and was diagnosed with an awful cancer. He was dead within 3 to 4 weeks of having taken early retirement. And he'd been living for this. I said to the family member, he said, he's been talking about this for years. Gone. What about the parable of the talents? Do you remember that one with Jesus? Jesus says, if you think you can keep putting off doing the things with me that I want to do with you when there are no consequences, let me tell you a parable about the talents and how God's economy works. If you don't think you have anything, give it all for me and I will give you more. But if you go through life constantly thinking you don't have enough, you will have less, and in the life to come, you may even have less. Even less. This is Jesus' words about the dangers of this. Or another one. Do you remember the new wine and wineskins? Jesus just goes, if you want me to fill your life, I can't take the way you currently live and fill it. Because if I do, guess what's going to happen to it? What's going to happen in the parable? It's going to burst. Some of us have wondered why, when God has filled our lives, they have burst. It's because they were not ready to receive what he has for us. And we need a new wineskin and a new way to be filled. As I was thinking about this, I was thinking, I say to people I'm a recovering workaholic, and I am a recovering workaholic. The reason I'm a workaholic is because I had 2 work-shy parents who meant the only reason I'm not homeless is because I had to deal with all the letters that came through the post when my father disappeared and my mother took to bed. Having to do that at 16 was pretty awful to have to go through. And what that means is one of the things, I made a decision early on in life. I was going to be the opposite of my parents. I was going to work hard. And that's good to survive when you're young. But when you're older, and God's done a lot in me, he's worked a lot in me and dealt a lot with me, and it is my alcoholism. By the way, alcohol was what went on in my family. Systemic use of alcohol still is by my siblings to deal with life. And I just substituted that for work. Work's an amazing drug. I've got high on working hard. Some of you are nodding. You know what the high of work is like. It is a high to work. But do you know what's really underneath that as well? Control. If I do this, I'll be in control. If I do this, I'll be safe, I'll be secure. And that's why I struggle to rest unless I'm working. And the danger is that I, as a pastor, make you my glory. When there's enough of you and enough money in the bank and no conflicts going on and everybody likes me, then I can rest. We're never going to have enough people. We're never going to be a church that doesn't have conflicts. And there's never going to be a time where you all like me. And if that's the conditions for being at rest, what will happen to me being at rest? I'll never be at rest. Oh, it's public confession, isn't it? I feel like I'm taking all my clothes off at the minute. I think I'd rather do that than this. Right now, you're praying, don't go there. And it'd be on video as well. That'd be really embarrassing. It'd be one of those moments that go viral, wouldn't it, when the pastor lost it. And I'm about to go on sabbatical. I've already found myself justifying to you my sabbatical. Well, it's professional development, and I've got coaches, and I'm seeing people, and I'm doing stuff. And why am I justifying going on sabbatical? Because my greatest fear of all is you will think, lazy sod. Wish I had 3 months off. Lazy git. It's all right for him. That's what really is going on in here, in me, about sabbatical. By the way, it's one of the reasons I need to go on sabbatical. I've been exploring with my spiritual director for the last few months how a recovering workaholic takes a sabbatical, because I need to get to a place where I know that you are part of this church because of who Jesus is and not me. I've got to die to that. That's why I need to do that. But you know what? It's even worse than what I have just told you. I told you one layer. I just told you another layer. But you know the other layer that's even worse? In writing this down this morning and telling you this story, there is a layer underneath that layer which was what went through my mind. I came to that place of I will divulge that to you this morning. And then I felt the Holy Spirit show me something. He said, yeah, Jason, but even going down that far with you this morning is so that I can make you feel sorry for me. And it's not about trusting Jesus. That's how far down in me that goes. So, I did a little bit of repenting, getting ready for this morning. When am I going to trust you, Heavenly Father? When am I going to trust you? When am I going to stop thinking that if I work enough, everything will be okay? When am I going to realize that you are responsible for everyone and not me? When? And the Lord said to me, do you want to be well, Jason? And I'll be honest with you, I almost said to the Lord this morning when he whispered that to me, not sure I'm ready for that yet. That wouldn't be good, would it? It's never good to put off what God has in us. I've just turned 50. I've put off this long enough, some of this stuff long enough. So I'm just sharing mine with you in the hope that I'm telling you what I need to repent of. And my last question for you is this. You remember at the beginning I said, who's tired? Remember that? Underneath your tiredness, go to the situation that you pray and wish God would change, and then take that next step. If you can be brave, I'm trying to be brave. And go, Jesus, what do I need to repent of? Where do I need to let go? And you be my glory, and you be my provider, and my love, and my protector, and my master. Amen.